Hey everyone, welcome to the Well-Oiled Mind. We specialize in history, biography, psychology, and philosophy set within a European context. Join us now and illuminate your life. Today's video is part 3 of our 5-part Bringers of Destiny series, where we are rating 5 of Rome's best generals. Today, we'll be unveiling the general in 3rd place. If you have not yet seen episodes 1 and 2, we'll drop a link down in the description so you can check those out. Before we analyze number 3, however, let's review our methodology. To begin with, we conducted a document review of Roman generals. Then, we picked 5 that were consistently agreed by scholars and military historians to be among the best. Next, we rated them using 7 criteria. These criteria were their ability to win, their skill at seizing opportunities, their skill at anticipating, how well they adapted to situations, whether they could offer inspired leadership, how well they bounced back from adversity, and finally, what lasting impact they had on the legendary Roman army. We graded the generals using a simple 3-point scale. A general was awarded 3 points for doing well, 2 points for a neutral rating, and 1 point for doing poorly. The highest possible score, therefore, is 21. Episode 1 addressed the general who's 5th on our list, and that was Germanicus Julius Caesar. He was then followed by Emperor Trajan in 4th position. Now, let's examine the general in 3rd place. 3rd on our list is Julius Caesar. Caesar is arguably the most famous Roman of all time. He's one of those great figures from history who remain larger than life even today. He was legendary while alive, and his spectacularly bloody death on the Ides of March only helped seal his immortality. Much of his hard-won fame was achieved while fighting in Gaul from 58 to 50 BC. Now, Gaul in Caesar's day was made up of parts of modern-day Switzerland, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and northern Italy. In addition to the Gallic Wars, he also fought in the devastating Civil War from 49 to 45 BC, leading one of the 2 great factions. This war saw him do battle in Italy, Spain, Greece, Africa, and the Balkans, where his legions contested with those of Pompey Magnus, also known as Pompey the Great. His was a full life, and to be sure, he did quite a bit more than fight in just these 2 great conflicts. However, his earlier efforts don't compare to these 2 larger wars. So, for the sake of time, we'll look exclusively at these 2 episodes, and of the 2, we're going to delve a bit deeper into the Gallic War. So, let's go there now. A highly ambitious man, Caesar campaigned in Gaul mostly to gain notoriety and wealth. In the slaughter that ensued, he attained both. While it is true that Caesar's conquest of Gaul made Rome more secure, one cannot say that his motives were purely patriotic. In fact, if we take a cynical view, we can conclude that his motives were not even mostly patriotic. In the end, what becomes clear is this: Caesar fought for Caesar. The revenues and booty he secured during his time in Gaul saw him grow immensely wealthy and popular, particularly among the common people. This horrified the patriciate and the Senate back in Rome because those 2 factors were the key to power in the Roman world. Moreover, and further terrifying the Roman nobility, during the course of almost a decade north of the Alps, Caesar demonstrated he was a first-rate leader, commander, tactician, strategist, and not to mention a highly popular and gifted politician. He was a man of many parts. He personally led desperate hand-to-hand fighting when necessary, but he was also skilled in logistics planning at advanced levels so that he could sustain large field armies. He could be both magnanimous or devastatingly savage depending on what he felt the situation required. Though it's difficult to sum up an 8-year war, we'll give it a go. In 58 BC, Caesar fought and defeated the Helvetii and the Suebi. Now, the Helvetii, based roughly out of modern-day Switzerland, they posed a threat of mass migration into northern Italian lands that the Romans controlled. The Helvetii were joined in their unrest by the Suebi people, a group of Germanic tribes from around the Elbe River region who were actually Roman allies at the time. Despite their huge combined numbers, Caesar concluded that both groups had been unlawfully threatening and raiding other more faithful Roman allies. With this determination made, Caesar had his justification to unfurl his standards and march to war. The wars against the Helvetii and the Suebi peoples were important for several reasons. First, they allowed Caesar to test his troops in battle against deeply feared, well-resourced, and highly capable enemies. It was Gallic tribes, after all, that had sacked Rome back in 390 BC. While most of the legions were theoretically veteran, these victories further seasoned the legions and gave them additional confidence. Secondly, Caesar and his leaders became familiarized with at least some of the terrain and geography of Gaul, an area where many would spend nearly half of their enlistment. Third, Caesar employed large forces, around 5 legions plus auxiliaries at this time. These campaigns were therefore useful to Caesar in perfecting his long-distance command and control of large units, and in training subordinate leaders to do the same exact thing. Lastly, these early battles netted the initial haul of much sought-after financial reward. Booty of all sorts was captured during these wars and likely whetted Caesar's appetite for more. More importantly, his haul of coin literally gave him the goods to swell his gravitas, enhance his forces, and execute his next move. In 57 and 56 BC, Caesar semi-pacified Western Gaul from its northern to southern reaches. Extensive use of field fortifications and siege works, something that would remain a theme for Caesar, was commonplace, and it usually overawed the Gauls who had no such knowledge. Additionally, he even engaged in naval warfare after spending considerable time building a local navy to battle the Veneti, a coastal tribe in northwest Gaul. The Romans were not skilled seamen when compared to the Veneti, and their typical craft were much better suited to the Mediterranean, not the Atlantic. Yet, a simple but effective tactical adaptation, the grappling hook, allowed the Romans to employ an easily produced and low-cost means to negate the Veneti advantage. Basically, they drew in close to the superior Veneti craft, grappled them alongside their own ships, and then boarded with great violence. From there, they used their outstanding close combat skills to battle the tribesmen as if on land. In time, as is so often the story with the Romans, their sheer numbers combined with unmatched tenacity saw them win out. At the risk of minimizing Caesar's accomplishments in 55 BC, this was not his most notable year in Gaul. Probably in a bid to gain fame and praise and continue overawing the Gauls, he crossed the English Channel into Britannia in a daring amphibious operation. Additionally, he also crossed the Rhine through one more astonishing engineering feat. Caesar and his legions were actually able to put a bridge across the Rhine in about 10 days. Pretty amazing during that day. It seemed neither land nor wave could restrain this man of unconquerable ambition. Nevertheless, some might characterize these operations as mere publicity stunts. We prefer the term reconnaissance and force, with publicity and prestige as fringe benefits. To put a finer point on this, the United States Army has a field manual, 1-02.1, entitled Operational Terms. It defines a reconnaissance in force as, quote, a type of reconnaissance operation designed to discover or test the enemy's strength, dispositions, and reactions, or to obtain other information, unquote. This appears to be precisely what Caesar did, especially in light of those actions he took the following year. We need to keep in mind that around this time, he had just been granted 5 more years as governor of Gaul, so such operations actually make sense when viewed in that context. He was merely reconnoitering other territories that he might seek to pacify in the coming years. These audacious endeavors demonstrated to the Gallic and Germanic tribes that they were being confronted by an enemy with great reserves of all types of resources, an even greater will to dominate, and highly advanced technologies. 54 BC can be characterized by a full and successful invasion of Britain and quelling of uprisings of Gaul. The invasion of Britain expanded upon his reconnaissance in force the previous year and saw local leaders submit and offer tribute. The uprisings in Gaul resulted in some serious Roman defeats and the appropriate countervailing responses by Caesar. Nevertheless, 54 BC clearly illustrated that the Gauls were by no means close to being comprehensively brought to heel. To this point, in 54 BC, Caesar ended up losing about 2 legions worth of men. We can also see that after operations in Britain, The year was spent stabilizing his local support areas, securing his winter camps, and drafting up plans for 53 BC. We can see it all so clearly now with the critic's gift of hindsight, but Caesar had no such certainty. From his perspective, he was in a fight for his life. In 53 BC, Caesar went on the warpath before the cold winter weather had even abated. He prosecuted a campaign of devastation throughout Gallic lands, terrorized civilian populations, and subdued at least 2 tribes in the offing. When spring finally arrived and the traditional campaigning season began in earnest, he continued this program. He divided his now 9 legions to cover more ground, and one by one, Roman heels were placed astride Gallic throats. Germanic tribes noticed the chaos in their neighbor's land, and some attempted to exploit the situation. Those who did paid the price, for Caesar made no real distinction of non-Romans. As far as he was concerned, one disruptor of the peace was as bad as another. At the end of the year, Gaul was stable, though simmering with resentment. Caesar's bloody tactics were about to catch up with him. 52 BC was the climax of the wars of Gaul. A Gallic leader, Vercingetorix, united the balance of the tribes and led a massive revolt against the hated Roman rule. In 52 BC, the battles take on a more large-scale nature, with Gallic and Roman armies more or less fully consolidated. There were several major battles, 2 of which are worth mentioning. At Gergovia in modern-day France, the Romans, who had allowed themselves to become massively outnumbered, were handily beaten and suffered many casualties. The defeat was so stinging, in fact, an argument can be made that after Gergovia, Caesar was momentarily on the strategic back foot. Vercingetorix, with a vast tribal coalition at his disposal, had wrenched the initiative away from Victoria's darling. So, Caesar had to try something else. Always up for a challenge, he set about besieging the town of Alesia, a tribal capital that Vercingetorix and 60 to 80,000 warriors had holed up in. What Caesar accomplished next must be rated as one of the greatest feats in all of military history. The Romans dug a line of siege works around Alesia called a circumvallation. These fortifications more or less entirely circled the village, with Vercingetorix and his warriors inside and immediately around the area. This was not a simple trench, mind you. The Romans incorporated wide ditches, tall towers to help observe the village, water-filled moats, spike-festooned slopes, gates, ditches to negate cavalry, and of course, there were grizzled legions standing watch all around the perimeter. The ever-industrious Romans began mass-producing missile weapons and even collected up rocks to use against the Gallic attack. These earthworks came to stretch somewhere between 24 and 25 miles. Upon discovering that a relief force was on its way to break Vercingetorix out, so to speak, Caesar dug a companion line of works called a battlement of contravallation. He had in effect ringed both himself and Vercingetorix in. One barrier was intended to halt Vercingetorix and his men in the village, and the other line of trenches was built to stop the relief force. The Romans, therefore, were snugly sandwiched in between the 2 lines of fortifications and these vast enemy hordes. This was all done in about 4 to 5 weeks, while supplies were constantly under the threat of running out. Battle eventually came, and it was desperate. The Gauls attacked the Romans from within and without Alesia. The battlements were penetrated at several points. Caesar personally intervened and moved reserves to threatened areas. Eventually, the Romans stood victorious, and Vercingetorix was forced to surrender. Gaul was conquered, but not yet fully pacified. As is so often the case, some mopping up had to be done, and embers of resistance continued to burn and reignite from time to time. From 52 to 50 BC, Caesar and his legions encamped among the Gauls to deter unrest, and they attacked those who were determined to resist. Finally, in 50 BC, Gaul was said to be fully pacified. Caesar had marched thousands of miles, fought dozens of battles in all seasons and across a vast area. If we believe contemporary accounts, his legions had killed hundreds of thousands of Gauls and Germanic tribesmen in the process and expropriated immeasurable portable wealth. It was an astounding military feat. Let us now examine a bloodbath of a different sort. The Civil War saw an equally impressive Caesar. He was almost always outnumbered, and frequently his supplies and logistics were on the brink of total collapse. He marched all over Europe, fighting in Hispania all the way to the Balkans. The war saw Caesar, leader of the rebellious faction, battling against his former ally, Pompey Magnus, and the rightful Senate. The culminating point of the internecine strife came in 48 BC, when Caesar was beaten by, then rallied and beat the Pompeian forces at Dyrrhachium and Pharsalus in modern-day Albania and Greece, respectively. From this point on, Caesar held and maintained the initiative, but the followers of Pompey, including his sons, resisted in Africa and Spain until the final battles in 45 BC. In the Civil War, we see much of what we saw in Gaul: dashing bravado, superior tactics, strategic boldness, extreme confidence, and the occasional miscalculation. But more often, we see a bias toward action to achieve advantage instead of waiting to achieve certainty. It's easy to allege that Caesar was rash and took unnecessary risks at times. Yet, it's equally easy to see these actions as the bold calculations of an experienced commander with high-order intellect and military gifts. The overall result seemed to support the latter. For example, in 49 BC, he allowed Pompey to flee east and regroup and fortify himself and the Senate across the Adriatic and the Balkans. Caesar then surprisingly marched west and reduced Pompey's strategic depth and support by attacking into the Pompeian power base of Hispania. In 48 BC, he again acted boldly and went against the conventions of campaigning. Though it was not the season for it, he crossed the Adriatic at great risk and surprised the Pompeians in Macedonia whilst they were whiling away their time in the winter billets. Now, let's get to the scoring. Caesar won victories across nearly the entire Roman map. It is hard to envision him losing, even a game, and laughing. He was a man driven to win and conquer. Caesar receives a 3 for his long list of victories. Probably more than anyone else, Caesar had a penchant for seizing opportunities. He did this so often and so successfully, it is possibly sometimes saw opportunities when they were actually very limited, such as his first foray into Britain. On the balance, though, with this vision to see and willingness to seize opportunities, he was always repaid with success. 3 points again. Caesar was highly adaptable. First off, like others, he did battle in multiple theaters against myriad foes in diverse climates and during all seasons. Secondly, he embraced innovations both large and small. We discussed the example of the grappling hook, but Caesar also adapted highly skilled German cavalrymen into his armies and even used them as his personal bodyguard. Lastly, the greatest example of this penchant for adaptation was the siege at Alesia, where he built the opposing lines of trenches, knowing that a Gallic relief force was imminent. Clearly, Caesar receives 3 points here. Caesar undoubtedly inspired his men. Whether it was physically taking up a shield in the final battle of the Civil War at Munda, as Appian tells us, or merely by accumulating one victory after another, this one is indisputable. Another score of 3. Caesar saw his fair share of defeats and setbacks, both personally and from subordinates, and these losses impinged upon his aims. He was driven away from Gergovia and Dyrrhachium, and these could have led to greater defeats, stalemates, or even truces forced upon him. But Caesar seemed to be eternally optimistic and lucky, and understood that the most important battle to win is the final one. 3 points. Caesar had a lasting impact on the Roman army, but we can't cast this as a positive. At his instigation, Romans killed fellow Romans in the tens of thousands. Unlike Germanicus, who remained loyal to the emperor when the legions actually acclaimed him emperor, Caesar fell headlong into the camp of might makes right. Julius Caesar never hesitated to turn the army back upon its supposed master, the Senate and people of Rome. Caesar's actions and the use of the army to further his personal ambitions, though certainly not unique, directly undermined the state. Therefore, we award him 1 point. All in all, we rate Caesar a 19 out of 21. We hope you've enjoyed our rundown today. We would love to hear your feedback on our assessment of the great Julius Caesar. What's your opinion? Was the Battle of Alesia Caesar's most remarkable military achievement? Or is Pharsalus, the great battle fought in Greece, a better testament to his military genius and his famous luck? Here his men were half-starved and outnumbered at least 2-1, but Caesar still notched a decisive win. Share your thoughts and ideas with us and the rest of the community. That's it for now. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope that if you like what you saw and heard today, you'll give us a like and subscribe to the channel. So long for now, and remember, knowledge is its own reward.